not above you, it's actually below you according to the Irish Constitution. You can dissolve it if it no longer serves your purpose.
That's an inspiration.
And the other thing he said was, that the governments in Europe are actually corporations that, like the Irish government and whatever, are actually corporations listed on some stock exchange. I mean, I haven't looked into this, but that means they're also liable for all the debts, because Ireland's huge debts now, because the government has taken on board all the Anglo-Irish debts just to get the country into debt and get it bankrupt, and they can then, with all this money that they get from the taxpayers, banks like Anglo-Irish can buy up everything.
It's all about centralisation of assets.
Yes, it is. Yeah. But apparently, that legally they're a corporation and they're only liable for their debt. So the people of Ireland can legally get together and say, we don't accept any of these debts because you, the government, are not the same as us, the people. We are the sovereign people, and you, the government, had a role to play. As long as we allowed you to play that role, this is the role you gave yourself, and you're liable for the debts, and we have nothing more to do with you. This is the perfect solution. And then, as for the future, we were thinking, apparently under the sovereign Irish principle, everybody's entitled to the land. There's no reason why you can't have part of the land. So you have to be responsible. It's not a license to be kind of greedy or anything like that. You're expected to be responsible, but it doesn't mean things like people who are homeless can, in theory, are allowed to choose maybe a little patch of land, and if they have to build a solid house, because with this comes responsibility to your community. They could build a wooden house, or with the help of their neighbours, and then this may be powered by renewable energy. These things are all possible under the Irish Constitution. Oh, he was telling me another anecdote. This guy was about to be thrown out of his house because he'd lost his job and he couldn't keep his mortgage payments up, and the bank was harassing him and so on. And under the Irish Constitution, the sheriff is responsible for keeping the peace, which means that he also is responsible for ensuring that banks don't throw people out of their homes when it's winter or whatever because they've lost their jobs, because the concept of peace is much wider than merely profit, or exactness of contracts. So they dug up this little clause from something which said, I call on the sheriff for my protection and to keep the peace in our shire because I'm about to be thrown out of my home by the bank. And this obliged the sheriff to protect this man from being thrown out of his home because he lost his job. And so the bank after that didn't stop demanding the mortgage payments. He's been in the home now.
Where was this?
This is somewhere in Ireland.
In Ireland? It's all happening in Ireland?
Yeah, and within this whole county or shire where the sheriff has his jurisdiction, nobody since then has been thrown out of their home as a result of losing their job and, having to pay back the mortgage payments. So, yeah.
Wow. There are a whole bunch of people in America who need to check that out.
Well, even I would say the whole world, both Scotland and the UK.
Yes.
Switzerland's in a better shape because they have direct democracy where they vote on issues. They don't have the two-party system. But
yes,
this could be the way forward. I mean,
That's inspiring.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. Yeah. Is this all going to go in your book? This sort of broader perspective, or is it only going to be about the pandemic?
What I was thinking of doing is a second book. You see, the first one mainly about the pandemic, simply because I wanted to get it finished by a certain date, so that it feeds into this whole report process and puts pressure, to be honest. And
that's what people want, and then you can follow it with the bigger picture.
And the second book is what I was thinking of would be showing our way out of the whole thing, solutions like personal sovereignty, renewable energy, and so on, and how we can rebuild our societies, homeopathy. So I hope to do that in 2 months or 3 months. This would be part of my trip to Greece would tie in with this, because it would be going back also to the ideas of ancient Greece, which are very sensible political ideas. I mean, if you read Plato and the Republic, it's not at all this totalitarian thing it's made out to be. It's a very sensible model. And it's also about personal responsibility. Plato keeps saying you can't expect a better political system than you as a human being, as an individual are. There's a correspondence all the time, and you have to improve as a person, your mind, your feelings, and so on, and then you can expect a better political system. And then my third book, I hope, will be more about spiritual questions, as we move towards 2012 and how the sunlight is interacting with our DNA and these sort of issues, and whether we're coming into this cosmic second coming of Christ kind of thing, the Christ consciousness and so on. But
we're coming into something. I don't know what it is, but things are changing, and we see the symptoms all around us.
Personally, I think we're coming to a very, very good time, for that. And I think it's almost too late for these people to implement their plans because of these changes. The sunlight is pouring down on the planet, of boosting this awareness, and without the fear factor, without they can't do it. And if they're being undermined everywhere, in ClimateGate, in the Iraq War inquiry, Timothy Guyton is almost in jail for his role in the AIG swindle, it's going to be very difficult for them even to start World War III and get away with it,
And they're really trying to rush this stuff through using all the force and propaganda and financial pressure that they can come up with. But if that's all they can do against the power of consciousness, then actually it's all over already, in terms of the fact they haven't got a chance.
And what is revealed is just how deluded these people are. I mean, who's sitting there saying we want to keep this on for 2 years, the pandemic level emergency 6, actually seriously saying this, at the inquiry at Pace in January, I think the 26th, Dr. Keiji Fukuda actually said that. I mean, everybody was sort of, couldn't believe it. So they're living in another universe. And they still have the levers and power, unfortunately, and in their delusion they can still wreak a lot of havoc and maybe start a few nuclear wars. I'm sure they're thinking in these terms.
According to information that we have, they're still trying to do this.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think they will succeed. I really don't think they will succeed. But they're trying. But it's all building up to quite an interesting sort of an interesting climax here. It's very, very interesting.
So what they really need to get going is this war between Israel and Iran, because then they can get Russia and the EU in, because Russia's given Iran a lot of nuclear weapons and uranium. I knew somebody in Vienna who worked for the IAEA. He was a cost-free expert sent by the American government, and I think these are usually CIA officers, so he didn't tell me this, we just met socially. And he was responsible for monitoring the Iran nuclear program for the American government, and then he went back to Idaho, where they have this big nuclear research base, and Lockheed Martin, it's all interwoven, also working for the government. And I asked him, frankly, a couple of years ago when he came back to Vienna for a conference or a trip or whatever, did he think Iran was building a nuclear program for war purposes? And he said no. He said he didn't think so. He thought it was just a civilian program. But of course they could be getting missiles, from China or Russia. Russia's given them the equipment for their civilian program, and I think they want to get the EU involved. The EU under the Lisbon Treaty can. Now, technically in the EU, if they declare war, people can be forced to serve in the EU army. Few people know that.
I didn't know that.
No, it's terrible. With the Lisbon Treaty came conscription.
Really?
Absolutely. This is one of the sticking points why the Irish voted no the first time round, and they were given the concession that they don't have to serve in the army. And people are not aware that they could theoretically end up having to serve in the EU army. The Lisbon Treaty creates an EU army, creates a general staff, the whole infrastructure for an EU army. Then of course now we have this commission, and Baroness Ashton is the foreign minister of the EU, and if she declares a war, every single foreign minister within the EU is obliged to back her up. It's called solidarity principle or something like that. So they're not allowed to say, we don't think this is a real war, we're not bothered, They're actually obliged legally by the Lisbon Treaty to give their support to her if she says, we're declaring a war. And if she does do that, it is theoretically possible to start conscripting people. So you just imagine they start in 9/11, they attack Berlin, a little mini nuclear bomb, they say, Iran did it, and we're in a war situation. They can try and clamp down the totalitarian grid, because in the EU Lisbon Treaty we're in a police state basically, and then they can start trying to conscript people although we're not aware of it, we're sitting now in that totalitarian trap in Europe. And but their dilemma is now that they've lost all credibility. That if they can't get the people to believe the nuke that's gone off in Berlin or something is really from Iran, and they can't get enough people to go into the army and obey these laws of the police to arrest people, then the whole thing is going to collapse. And I think this is their difficulty.
That is worth paying attention to. And presumably you're finding out about some of this stuff because you've got contacts into Ireland, because you've got Irish blood, haven't you?
Yes, my mother was from Ireland, and that's why I was following the Lisbon Treaty, and that's why I knew why the Irish voted no against the Lisbon Treaty. Right. Because when they were asked to vote on the Lisbon Treaty, they were not given the actual treaty, they were just given 300 paragraphs which amended other treaties. Right. And the EU actually forbade these paragraphs to be printed beside the original treaties. People couldn't see exactly what was being amended. But the Irish, being the Irish, went out and found all the original treaties and put the amendments beside it and printed their own copies, and then tried to figure out, because you're just seeing the legal text and small changes in wording to many legal paragraphs and text, so you have to figure out what's actually behind all of this. What are they actually achieving with all these things? And then they eventually worked out that behind all of this is this totalitarian superstructure with an EU police and EU army allowed to shoot protesters under the current laws, and so that's why they voted no the first time round. And the Irish police were patrolling the voting station. So the first time round, every single ballot box was guarded by the police, taken to the polling station by the police, taken to the counting office by the police. Every ballot that was taken out was being watched by about 10 people. And this second vote, there were no police in sight. Police had vanished. The ballot boxes disappearing and reappearing and so on. And I'm convinced it was a forged vote. I mean, there's no way I believe that the Irish had decided to say yes in that proportion of quantity. The Irish were the only ones who were allowed to vote in the Lisbon Treaty, because under their laws, I think the judge, there's some clause in their law or whatever, which says that if there's a treaty that so materially changes their basic civil rights, they have to be allowed to vote in it. And the Lisbon Treaty basically abolishes all our civic rights, And so that's why this triggered this law, which obliged the government to vote in, because they didn't want to vote in it either. No other country got a vote in it. I mean, it's shocking, it's disgraceful how